Hello and welcome back to Ideagen's 17 Days of Sustainability. Today we are very happy to have with us Charu Jain, the Senior Vice President of Merchandising and Innovation for Alaska Airlines, and Diana Birkett Rakow, the Vice President of External Relations at Alaska. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much for being here today. And with that, I will pass it over and allow you two to have a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you, John. It's such an incredible honor and privilege to be here for my third Ideagen event. I spoke at the United Nations Empowering Women and Girls Summit last year about how Alaska is developing ecosystems and partnerships to support innovative solutions to people and technology. So I'm passionate about ensuring opportunities exist for young girls and women to be future leaders because of the opportunities that I had at an early age. So today, I'm extremely honored and excited to have Diana with us. As John mentioned, Diana is the VP of External Relations for Alaska Air Group. She leads Alaska's public and government affairs, sustainability, community engagement, PR, and internal communications. And she's really responsible for advancing Alaska's legacy of responsibility and corporate citizenship. So there could be no better person to join us for Ideagen's 17 Days of Sustainability Summit. So welcome, Diana.
Hi, Charu. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you, even though we're not in the same office, but we're sort of together.
Exactly.
So then I wanted to start with a big picture question. You're driving Alaska Air Group's environmental and social governance strategy and priorities, and these tie really well to several of the UN Sustainability Development Goals. So why does Alaska care about these issues, and what role does that really play in our business and our culture?
That's a great question, Charu, and I know you know a lot of this answer, but there's a couple of things that I would say. One is very historical. Alaska Airlines grew up serving rural, small communities and keeping communities connected in the state of Alaska. And now we're a national and even international routing airline that connects people around the globe. But that sense of place and that sense of connectedness, and that we aren't here without strong communities and a strong environment around us, sort of continues to carry through our culture. More formally, when we talk about the business and what drives the business, we have this wheel that connects different stakeholders, and we think about our responsibility to the four stakeholder groups: our guests, our employees, our owners, and our communities. And we have to keep responsibility to each one of those groups in balance in order for the company to be successful. So that directly ties to a lot of the things that the Sustainable Development Goals reference, and keeps us moving forward in a balanced and responsible way.
Great. Yeah, since I've joined Alaska, I've really been amazed by our commitment to our communities and all of the four stakeholders you spoke about. Let's talk a little bit about climate change. So
Sure.
Air travel is such a transformational an industry. It connects people with one another, helps communities across the globe grow, thrive, and create jobs and economic benefits. However, we do know we have an impact on the climate via carbon emissions and using and burning jet fuel. So what really is that impact, and how does it compare to other industrial sectors? And how are we at Alaska Air Group holding ourselves responsible to addressing it?
Well, certainly carbon emissions are our most significant environmental benefit. And so that's why in our strategy moving forward, we have prioritized reducing carbon emissions as one of our key priorities. For a number of years now, about 8 years, we've been measuring greenhouse gas intensity and publicly reporting our progress, holding ourselves accountable to a goal of reducing the intensity of our carbon emissions, or carbon dioxide per what we call revenue ton mile, but it's basically a metric of how many passengers we're flying over time. You know, it matters because we know that carbon and other greenhouse gases have an impact on the environment in terms of climate change. And we take that responsibility to mitigate our impact on climate change very seriously. You know, even just this week, this month, we're seeing the incredible impacts around our communities I'm sitting here in the office and it's a sunny day, but very hazy because of the smoke that's flying over from Eastern Washington because of all the fires. And down the Western Seaboard, a lot of our fellow employees and guests have had to leave their homes because of these intense fires, which have been connected to the overall trend of warming. So we have to make sure that we're making a difference in that. So there's a couple of things. One, aviation actually has a fairly small impact overall on greenhouse gas emissions. It's about 2% overall coming from of global emissions coming from the aviation sector. That doesn't diminish in any way our responsibility to address those, but it is relatively small. That said, over time, it is going to grow. Other industries, trucking, trains, cars, I have an electric car. A lot of the ground transportation can electrify or use alternative energies a lot sooner. And there's some particular technological and sort of physics complexities to aviation that mean that something like an electric battery is a longer way out, especially for longer range flying. So there's a couple of things that we're doing to mitigate our impact. And what I was going to say is, so over time, we're projected by 2050 or so to be a much more significant percentage of those global greenhouse gases. And therefore, we have to take action now in order to address that future. And the aviation industry as a whole has committed to carbon neutral growth internationally from 2020 on, and to reducing carbon emissions over 2005 levels by 50% by 2050. Okay, so what does it take to get there? The bottom line is I think in the United States, we always want the pill, the one-stop solution. Unfortunately, like most complex issues, this just doesn't have one. So there's sort of three horizons that we're planning on. The first one is actions that we can take today to reduce the amount of fuel that we use. We use what are called split scimitar winglets on our airplanes. So you'll see on the end of the airplane wing, there's some pretty long prongs that go out of the side. And those alone save about 34,000 gallons of fuel a year. And reducing fuel translates directly into reduced carbon emissions. There's other things that we can do, like only turning one engine on in the taxiway, rather than doing both engines, if all you need to do is get out to the runway or come back into a gate. All of those things are geared around reducing the amount of operating carbon dioxide and gas that we use just in regular operations. And so we have a continued goal of being the most fuel and carbon efficient U.S. airline operation that there is. And we've had historical advantage in efficiency in that area, and we mean to keep it. The second one is around replacing Jet A fuel with sustainable aviation fuel. And we just announced recently off-taking sustainable aviation fuel on a regular basis from one of the suppliers called Neste in the Bay Area. They're a Finnish company. They're bringing shipping fuel in, but it's in the fuel farm at SFO, and we are using it straight from there. Sustainable aviation fuel has the opportunity to reduce carbon emissions by 80% over Jet A fuel. Now, the challenge is getting sustainable aviation fuel to a place that it is commercially viable, price-wise, and also scalable to replace Jet A fuel over time. It may never replace it entirely, but continuing to increase that fraction is a big deal. And you'll see us work more on sustainable fuel going forward. Alaska Airlines did the first test flight of sustainable fuel. We've done 80 test flights, but what's important now is bringing it into regular practice. The third horizon then is redesigning aviation overall. So how do we actually get past using a fuel burning engine? Can we look at electrification? Can batteries be small and light enough? Hydrogen fuel cells are another opportunity. So that's getting directly into your world, Charu, in terms of thinking about that sort of fundamental innovation shift. And there's a lot of people looking at this, but our long-term goal is to transform aviation for a sustainable future.
That's great, Diana. And I know that being a technologist, you're also looking at some technologies that'll are flying and using artificial intelligence and machine learning to kind of like a ways in the skies. Do you want to talk any more about that?
Sure. So it's kind of in that first horizon of things we can just do to improve the operation. I'll talk about one we already do, and we're looking at building on this. So we were the sort of inventor and first user of something called RNP, remote navigation procedures, which I'm not a pilot, but the simplest way to describe it is it's a much more gradual approach, so that like coasting down a hill, you can use latent energy to push the plane forward toward descent. Versus accelerate, brake, descend, accelerate, descend, which uses a lot more energy. And so we use RNP procedures. It saves about 1 million gallons of fuel a year. We're trying to increase the number of places where we use those procedures because that's controlled by airport airspace and air traffic control. But then building on that technology, what are the other ways that we can, in the overall flight planning and route optimization, how can we take more direct routes? How can we anticipate what conditions are coming so that we can save guests time, but also save fuel and emissions burn? So we're really excited about more developments to come on that front.
Yeah, those are exciting. So, being responsible is important to the younger generation, millennials, and they are our guests and future guests. How much of this is a company acting responsibly on their own versus driven by consumers or government or regulations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I think it's all of it. And if we rely on just one, we probably are sort of thinking about it too simply or leaning into one category too much. Government is a great galvanizer. I think government can also, with things like biofuels and sustainable aviation fuel tax credits and R&D credits, can help kickstart something before the market allows it to take off, or create tax incentives for manufacturing so that something can get to commercial viability and scalability. But at the end of the day, for something to be truly sustainable, I think that it needs that market force to sort of build it into regular practice. And consumers play a huge part in that. How are we each using our purchasing power, whether we're buying services from another company as a corporate entity, or whether we're just as an individual choosing what services to buy or what products to purchase? How are we kind of exercising that power? And I think all generations do that in different ways. The younger generation, I think, have certainly kind of put that at the top of their list, and that's going to really push us. And I think that's excellent.
Yes, our future generations are really going to lead to a bright future here. So let's move to talk a little bit about life below water and life on land. So being an airline, why do we care about that?
Well, think about where we fly. So we fly to the beaches of Hawaii. Incredible environment, but very, very precious in terms of the quality of the ocean, the coral reef health, the diversity of fish and species that you can see when you go snorkeling out in Hawaii, all the way up to the glaciers in Alaska, the fishing industry in Alaska, which is huge economically. All of this depends on a healthy ocean. And what we've learned is, and obviously is reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals, this is all connected. Healthy ocean life, healthy river life depends on a healthy life on land, and trees and habitat, et cetera. So we've done a couple things in this regard. We joined an initiative last year called Promise the Pod here in the Puget Sound area, because our resident orca whales have been severely threatened. They're iconic for this region. They are a symbol of beauty and hope, and they have been struggling due to increased ocean temperatures, noise, salmon availability, et cetera. So our role was we launched this campaign called Fill Before You Fly. I've got my water bottle here, which means, use your own reusable water bottle, #tag us, rather than using cups on board. And when you tag us, we'll plant a tree in a salmon habitat in your honor, which contributes to orca protection. Another example is a year and a half, 2 years ago, we were the first airline to remove straws and stir sticks from our operations. That's 20 million straws and stir sticks a year that we nixed out of the operation. Straws are known to get wrapped up in garbage. They're harder to recycle, and they get, they'll puncture a fish or get stuck in a whale or a shark's mouth, and all of those things lead to degradation of the ecosystem. So, the air, the water, the land, it's truly all connected, and we have a responsibility to look after all of it.
Great. I've got my filter for
you. Excellent.
Too. So I know you've often asked me about what are we doing to reduce paper in the environment with all the technological advancements.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's amazing is when you can avoid printing a boarding pass in the airport. And right now with COVID-19, no one actually wants to hold that paper anyway. So how are we going to get to that next level of sort of paperless? You've done a ton, but paperless, wasteless operation. What's on your docket to get there?
Yes. So I think with COVID, hygiene and safety concerns have become top of mind. So we're making it easier for our guests to travel almost entirely touch-free, so that and also reduce the need to handle paper at every step of the journey. So with the Alaska Airlines mobile app, you can check in for your flight, you can generate a mobile boarding pass, and so much more. You can scan boarding passes 6 feet apart, print bag tags without touching the check-in kiosk, and purchase food and beverages on board using a stored payment preference, so that you're avoiding exchanging things. But to avoid printing and handling boarding passes or receipts, our customer service agents now have a tool that they can send you a text message that includes all of the travel information with a link to your boarding pass, gate, and seat assignment. And they can also email you receipts like your bag fees or anything. So imagine how much paper will be taken out of the environment just from those actions starting now because of COVID. And we're going to start reducing paper boarding passes and really take them out of the environment. But even prior to COVID, actually, reducing paper has always been a goal. We've moved to a nearly entirely digital flight release process, which is paperless. And so it eliminates the needs for pilots to print paperwork for every flight. And I believe it saves tons of paper as measured when that was done. And then obviously pilots and flight attendants they used to carry these huge paper manuals, and now that's all digital, so they don't have to be printed and reprinted every time there's an update. Our airport staffing tools have also reduced the need for paper schedules. So anytime there's an update to somebody's schedule, instead now it's all sent to them via their iPads. So we're really taking a look across every aspect of our employees and our guest experience and removing paper out of that. So it's pretty exciting.
That's cool, Charu. It's, I know when I'm traveling with my kids, I can keep track of this, but I can't keep track of all those little bits. So I think it's good for the guest experience as well.
Yeah.
And I know, it's kind of it's a good example of where this work isn't the sustainability person's job. This work is really everybody's job. And I think in some of our companies that, are very operational companies, it's really important to start instilling that in the culture, because you are going to have phenomenal ideas about how to reduce paper or reduce carbon or reduce waste. CSAs will, flight attendants will. Our recycling program was actually started by our flight attendants. So it really is sort of, that's the transformation, is when it's just something that all of us kind of have in the back of our mind and innovate in small ways to contribute.
No, very true. It's everybody's job with guidance. So Let's talk a little bit about quality education. I know that Alaska invests in many ways supporting the community, and especially focused on youth and education and workforce development. And we want to see more students from all backgrounds have the chance to become future leaders in aviation. We hold Aviation Day every year. Obviously, we couldn't hold it this year, and it's just a fascinating event. So tell us a little bit more about that work.
Sure, and I'm going to pitch this back to you too, because I know you've been directly involved in this work. But I'll just sort of start with actually one of the things that I thought was really cool about Alaska when I came to Alaska is that several of our vice presidents started either as a frontline pilot, as a ramper or a gate agent, as a ground services agent, all the different, ways of contributing within the airline operation, and continue to grow their careers into leadership positions. And I think that makes us stronger as an entity, because the leaders really understand the work. But it also, I think, reflects values of continuing to grow and develop talent. And so we know that if we're going to continue to grow and develop talent and diverse talent, we have to actually start early. And, we love it when people choose aviation as a career, but we also know that we need great teachers, great doctors, great everything, engineers, coders. Your team, Charu, you need great people that are going to come up with new ideas and make them happen in the digital environment. So how have we worked on that? What we try to focus on, and we actually were fortunate to have an Alaska Airlines Foundation that was started about 20 years ago that contributes to this work through grants. But we also try to think about how do we use our human capital, how do we use our voice and advocacy in supporting, advocating for government programs or funding for particular training opportunities like aviation mechanic training that are needed and will start to become a talent area that's more scarce. And also our resources of just flying, getting people to educational opportunities. So that's sort of how we structure thinking about what assets do we bring to the table. Some of the programs that we've supported, I'll just give you a couple of examples, and then I'll get some of yours as well. One is this really cool program up in the state of Alaska, started by an engineer, PhD engineer, that went to Alaska to work on the pipeline. And he was surprised that there weren't more people from Alaska that were actually in those jobs. And he made it his life's mission to make sure that there were. So it's a program called the Alaska Native Science and Engineering Program, or ANSEP, and it brings young people from villages all over the state of Alaska into Anchorage to study at the University of Alaska at Anchorage, and be coached and have a community together and learn about science, engineering, technology, math. And many of them have gone on to be engineers or professors. Some of them stay in Anchorage, some of them move to the lower 48, many of them go back to their villages and make sure that they're contributing to local infrastructure. So that's just an incredibly amazing program. There's another program in rural Alaska in Bethel that trains airline mechanics and pilots, and begins that sort of pilot, starting as a bush pilot and moving into commercial aviation. One example that's closer to home here in Seattle and a little bit more urban is the work at the Pacific Science Center. Does a Science on Wheels program, bringing science education into classrooms where educators and students might not have as many resources to have equipment for experiments, or constellation maps, or astronomy domes. And they set all that stuff up remotely and give the educators some curriculum materials. So through COVID, with everybody remote learning, that work has moved online, and we gave a grant to support science at home because, as the Science Center says, curiosity never closes, to keep supporting kids in that ongoing learning process. Our work at the foundation is focused around inspiring, empowering, and equipping young people to reach their goals, because it really does cover all of those things. And there's a lot more work to do. There's a lot of people that are helping this, and we're just sort of humbled to contribute to a lot of programs in the community that do this work. So one of them I know is Year Up, which is a fantastic process and a fantastic program, and you're involved there. And also, I think, as a mentor and advisor at the University of Washington, sort of on the other end of the career or education journey. Talk a little bit about why you volunteer your time to get involved in that and what it means to you.
Yes, Diana, I think it's so important to get young girls and women into technology and aviation careers, and opportunity youth. And early on, or in early stages when they're in middle school or high school, that's when they start sort of self-selecting out of these paths. Yeah. And so it's very important to get to them early. And so recently I had the opportunity to speak to a very talented group of young women from high schools across the state of Washington. And they were participating in a Young Women's Leadership Summit that was hosted by the University of Washington Foster School of Business. And I led them through a discussion of industry disruptors and the large role that technology is playing in more and more in our professional and our personal lives. And I'll tell you, I mean, if getting their reflections back on the session, some of them said, well, I'm definitely going to take a technology course now in college. And even if only one person considers taking something different after that day, it's a huge success. And it was great to, like I said, work with these impressive young women and get to them at that early stage so that we can really have an impact. And then Year Up is another outstanding organization. I'm honored to be on their board in the Puget Sound area. So Year Up is a program that's focused on closing the opportunity divide of inequality. It's an exceptional organization which trains and places young urban adults in the workplace, and the majority of whom are Black. So Year Up selects and trains these students. They become interns for technology organizations, and then often are hired into full-time jobs as a result of this organization. So Alaska has been very active in sponsoring internships for Year Up students, and just creating these internship opportunities moves talented, 18 to 24-year-olds from zero to low-wage jobs to living wage careers in 1 year. And that's really the focus of Year Up, is helping them up for a wage that they can actually grow. And it's not just the first step, but it's a journey in their whole career. And it's also become the catalyst for a sort of this powerful paid forward reaction in the alumni themselves. So I had learned that one of our recent graduates also donated money to Year Up after converting their internship into a full-time role at an amazing tech company. And I was just blown away by, the generosity from such a young professional so early in their career. So it's an awesome organization. And it's important because it's a talent pipeline for us to compete in the Pacific Northwest with large technology giants. So Alaska competes on our culture, our people first mode, and then attracting talent early on and helping them understand that the airline jobs have a big technology organization behind them, which may not be evident right away, and so that they would consider jobs in aviation and technology.
That's really neat. One of the things that you just sort of struck a chord with me is sort of how connected everything is. That all the jobs you're talking about, I mean, you and I are probably exceptions. I studied math and science. I was a chemistry major, although I don't use it very often now. You clearly grew up in technology, but everything is connected to technology now. So, and everything, I mean, working on finance, balancing your budget, getting your budget ready for the next planning cycle, that's math. So it is a critical grounding set of technologies, grounding set of things, whether you end up in the arts or music or aviation or something else. Or one of the programs that we work with down in the San Francisco Bay Area takes inner city kids out to the national parks as part of learning about science and thinking about critical thinking in the environment. So maybe some of those folks will go on to be future conservationists, and maybe they'll just have a better appreciation of some of those issues and willingness to explore them. So thanks for your leadership in this area, for sure.
Yeah, no, thanks. There's a lot of work to be done, but it's incredible to see the progress that's being made. In that vein, I mean, 2020 has brought such a significant focus to advancing racial justice and equity. And, businesses thrive when they have diverse talent from all backgrounds, when we're inclusive. Can you talk a little bit about Alaska's approach and what 2020 has brought to us and the commitments we're making in this area?
Yes, I'm happy to talk about that. And I think it's first prudent to call out that we are talking a lot about racial equity. We've made some commitments, and I'll describe those. But it's actually a little bit, I don't know, I'm a little bit ashamed to think that it took this wake-up call for us to move forward to this significant degree. And I think it's sort of important to remain humble about that. And yet, as a great, amazing Black community leader here in Seattle was saying to me yesterday, whatever the wake-up call is, whatever the way is of participating in the change, we welcome that. So for Alaska, we began to have a couple months ago some pretty deep listening sessions with especially our Black and Brown employees, but also anyone who wanted to join across the company. And I think really began to better understand, we saw what was happening in the external environment. We saw needless and senseless killings of Black Americans, and things that are just difficult to understand, but important to recognize as things that are not okay. So we began listening to our employees and better began to understand the pain that they experience, and in many cases, the discrimination that they experience in the world. And so based on their input, we came up with 3 commitment areas that we've publicly declared externally and that we are working toward. One of them is around ensuring a diverse talent pipeline into leadership, so that we've got diverse leadership perspectives and representation that makes this a better company, and also reflects the breadth of our employee base and the communities that we serve. So that's number 1. Number 2 is training and education and ongoing dialogue to make sure that we're a place where everyone feels truly safe and respected in the workplace, in our operation, and in the communities around us. And then the third one is not being afraid to share those values and knowing that we need to do our own work internally, but that there are many phenomenal organizations, NAACP, the Urban League, United Negro College Fund, who we've given miles and travel credit to for about 8 or 10 years now, to get kids to and from school at historically Black colleges and universities, to make sure that we also champion those organizations and are willing to share these values externally. I think in part of frankly, the purpose behind the Sustainable Development Goals is aligning us all around these shared objectives and recognizing that a company taking a stand on some of these critical human issues does make a difference. It doesn't mean we don't have to do our own work, but it also means that we can galvanize support and recognition for critical things that need to change in our world, and this is certainly one.
Yeah, no, it's like you said, it is amazing that it's taken this wake-up call to get there. But it's been really, I feel proud as an employee of Alaska to see the actions we're taking, and our CEO, Brad Tilden, and his declaration of we must do better. So a lot of great, reflection and really thinking about making a difference here. Diana, a lot of things we've talked about today, you think about Alaska as a company, in Alaska as a business, and the communities that we operate, the 23,000 amazing employees we have, the 48 million guests that we fly every year. So are all these actions sort of limited to within Alaska, or how do you scale the impact of these to a larger scale?
Yeah, I love that question because we love our company, but we are not the largest airline in the world. And so, and especially right now with COVID-19, we are struggling to recover, to make sure, we are moving in the right direction. We are going to be here. We are going to be strong, but we don't, we're trying to prioritize resources to make sure that it supports our employees' safety, our guests, et cetera. So how do we make sure that we make the most of limited resources and limited scale? And that takes relationships. So one of the things that I think is really special about Alaska, and I joined Alaska 3 years ago. Before that, I was an MVP Gold for 12 years. So I spent a lot of time crossing the country on Alaska Airlines airplanes. But like many loyal guests, I really grew to love the company and feel very connected to it. And it's because of those amazing people that you talk about. So how do we leverage those relationships and experiences to engage people in making choices that scale the impact of what we do in our operation into the world? So, I'll take Fill Before You Fly, for example. If people sort of hear the Fill Before You Fly message and are more inclined, I get so excited when I'm in an airport and the water bottle filling station has a line for people to fill up their water bottles. Probably a lot of them are flying on Alaska Airlines. Some of them may not. Some people are getting off an airplane and going out into the world, but want to have that reusable bottle rather than stopping and buying a plastic one. That's just one example, but whether it's the water bottles, whether it's purchasing carbon offsets, whether it's bringing your tote bag to the grocery store, composting or recycling, in all of our different regions, all of those little actions work together and scale. And then sort of the opposite direction as well, as we talked about earlier, when consumers use their energy, their voice, their purchasing power to encourage companies to move in this direction, there's really a positive flywheel effect that I think truly can galvanize change around the world.
Great. Well, Dana, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here with me today. It's been great talking to you about these issues, and just seeing, Alaska, like you said, is not the largest airline or the biggest business, but really all of the different points of impact that we're trying to drive and have and be a responsible company and try to change the world around us. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Charu. It's fun to have you as a partner on this. And just to your last question, this kind of ties in the racial equity thing, but I think if I can offer maybe a call to action or a suggestion for all of us, it's we talk about in sort of some of the racial equity work, seek to understand, ask to understand. And I think we can do that with environmental sustainability and all of these other issues as well. Ask the questions, find out what the impact is, find out sort of the trade-offs between different options. And the more that we ask, the more information will be provided and the more change that we can have over time. So I'm grateful to be your partner in this, and as well as IdeaGen and the UN and everybody working toward these efforts. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.